when my husband texted me, "I'm moving to Italy with Olivia." I moved our money into my personal account. Good luck paying the bills. I was sitting in my car right outside my daughter's school. My hands trembled, but as I looked at 6-year-old Lily buckling her seatbelt in the rearview mirror, a cold, terrifying calm washed over me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply typed 4 words back. "Thanks for telling me." He thought he was leaving me broken, stranded with an empty bank account while he boarded a first-class flight to Rome with his mistress. What he didn't realize was that while he spent months planning his romantic escape, I had been quietly watching every step he made. When his flight finally touched down on European soil, he expected a fresh start, but he landed straight into a trap I'd spent months preparing. My name is Clara, and I am 36 years old. To anyone looking from the outside, my life seemed completely predictable, almost routine. I spent my days analyzing balance sheets and tax records as a senior forensic accountant, and my evenings making dinner and helping my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, with her homework. But over the last 6 months, a quiet, cold distance had crept into my marriage. My husband, Julian, had become a shadow of the man I married. He was suddenly distant, spending long nights at his firm, constantly guarding his phone, and treating every question I asked as an intolerable interrogation. I felt the shift, but like many women trying to keep a family together, I hoped it was just a temporary rough patch. That illusion shattered on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the car line outside Lily's elementary school, watching the wipers sweep across the windshield as parents patiently waited for the afternoon bell. The heater was humming, and I was mentally planning dinner when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up, expecting a reminder from the grocery app or a quick note from Julian about being late for dinner again. Instead, I saw a text from Julian that made the air freeze in my lungs. "I'm on a flight to Italy with Olivia," it read. "We're starting over." I emptied the joint accounts and transferred everything to my personal bank. "Good luck paying the mortgage, Clara. Don't bother calling." For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Olivia was his 24-year-old marketing assistant. The woman he had insisted was just a dedicated employee whenever I questioned her late-night calls. He had timed it with sickening precision, waiting until I was trapped in the pickup line, waiting for our little girl to drop a bomb that was meant to crush me completely. He believed he was leaving me stranded, broken, and buried under instant financial ruin. He pictured me collapsing over the steering wheel in tears, frantically trying to call his phone only to hear a dead line. He wanted panic. He wanted desperation. Instead, a strange, crystalline calm washed over me. I looked at the school doors opening as little kids in bright raincoats began filing out toward the cars. I saw Lily waving at me, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The grief and shock were there, heavy and dark, but right beneath them, my professional instincts kicked in. Julian knew I managed corporate accounts, but he had spent 10 years assuming my job was just neat numbers on spreadsheets. He thought of me as a quiet homemaker who occasionally audited tax returns. He had no idea what a forensic accountant actually does when someone tries to steal from her. I picked up my phone, my fingers completely steady, and typed a reply. "Thanks for telling me." Then I put the phone down, unlocked the car door, and smiled as my daughter got in. Julian thought he was 10,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, celebrating his flawless getaway to Rome. He had no idea that the nightmare he intended for me was about to turn right back around and land directly on him. Buckling Lily into her seatbelt, I gave her a warm kiss on the forehead, pretending that everything in my world hadn't just split wide open. I forced a cheerful smile, answered her excited chatter about art class, and kept my hands steady on the steering wheel during the entire drive home. But underneath that calm exterior, my mind was operating at full capacity, running through every account, every code, and every paper trail Julian had touched. What Julian never realized in his arrogant arrogance was how he actually acquired the money he thought he'd so cleverly stolen. 3 years ago, when my family's boutique investment firm expanded, I restructured our joint holdings and corporate reserves. Julian had access, yes, but those accounts weren't simple personal bank funds. They were tied into a multi-tiered corporate trust managed under federal financial oversight, specifically designed to track, flag, and lock down unauthorized transfers exceeding certain thresholds. Julian assumed that because his name was on the account, moving $3 million into a newly opened private shell account in Switzerland and Italy would be as simple as tapping a button on a mobile app. He didn't know that 3 weeks ago, after noticing small, suspicious withdrawals disguised as consulting fees, I had quietly flagged our accounts for fraud monitoring. Every single dollar he moved wasn't just a marital theft, it was an automated federal alert triggered in real time. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I brought Lily inside, set her up at the kitchen island with her favorite coloring book and a snack, and walked straight into my home office. I pulled out my secure work laptop, bypassed the standard login, and accessed the forensic portal. My screen immediately lit up with red notifications. Julian had executed 4 massive transfers while sitting in the airport lounge, sipping overpriced champagne with Olivia. He had drained $250,000 from our personal savings, $800,000 from my family's business equity fund, and nearly $2 million from a client holding escrow account he mistakenly thought was his personal credit line. He hadn't just taken our life savings. In his desperate bid to look like a high-rolling millionaire to his young girlfriend, he had committed full-scale wire fraud and grand larceny across state and international lines. I picked up my phone and called David, my firm's lead legal counsel and a longtime family friend. "David," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Julian just emptied the holding accounts and boarded a flight to Rome. The automated security triggers just logged it. David gasped on the other end of the line. "Clara, tell me he didn't touch the escrow funds." "He took everything," I replied, clicking through the transaction logs. "And he texted me confirming he did it intentionally to leave me broke." "David, initiate the emergency freeze protocols immediately. Contact the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and file an emergency court injunction for asset recovery." "If we trigger the international fraud protocols now," David warned, "the moment that transaction settles, it becomes a federal crime. Interpol gets involved." I looked out the window at the quiet, rainy street, thinking of how Julian had planned to leave me and Lily with nothing but debt and eviction notices. "Trigger them," I said softly. "Let him fly high for a few more hours. The trap is already set." 10,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Julian was sitting in the first-class cabin, entirely blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the ground. He clinked his glass of chilled crystal champagne against Olivia's, leaning back into the leather seat with a smug, self-satisfied grin. To him, he was the brilliant mastermind who had outsmarted his domestic life. He had spent months secretly transferring funds, convincing himself that he deserved every cent for enduring what he viewed as a quiet, monotonous marriage. He looked at Olivia, who was posting photos of her designer passport holder to social media, and laughed about how I was probably stranded at the school, weeping, helpless, and wondering how I would cover next month's mortgage. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. He imagined landing in Rome, checking into a 5-star hotel overlooking the Colosseum, and spending the rest of his days living like royalty off funds he thought I would never be able to trace. He had no idea that while he was living out his grand fantasy, his entire life was being systematically dismantled in real time below him. Back in my home office, the atmosphere was focused and deadly silent. David and I were on a conference call with our legal team and a specialized agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Because Julian had transferred federally monitored escrow funds across international borders, his actions were no longer just a bitter divorce dispute. They were an active international crime. The paper trail was so clear, and the evidence of intent so undeniable thanks to his own arrogant text message, that a federal judge signed an emergency asset freeze and an international arrest warrant before Julian's plane even reached European airspace. Every bank account Julian had ever touched was locked tight. His personal credit cards, his newly opened offshore accounts, and even the digital wallets he planned to use for his lavish Italian vacation were flagged and frozen. The money he thought was waiting for him in Rome had vanished from his reach before his plane even began its descent. Coordinates and case files were transmitted directly to Interpol and Italian law enforcement authorities at Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport. As the aircraft began gliding downward through the clouds above Italy, the flight crew received a quiet, confidential notification from International Border Security to keep certain passengers in their seats upon landing. Julian adjusted his designer watch, taking Olivia's hand as the seatbelt sign illuminated. He turned to her with a confident smile, whispering that their new, glamorous life was about to begin the moment they stepped off the jet bridge. He couldn't wait to turn on his phone and see my frantic, desperate messages pleading for help. He had no clue that the only people waiting to greet him at the gate were wearing tactical badges and carrying handcuffs. The wheels of the Boeing 777 hit the tarmac at Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport with a heavy thud. Julian unbuckled his seatbelt immediately, adjusting his jacket and flashing Olivia a victorious grin. He turned on his phone, eagerly scrolling to find a barrage of panicked, weeping messages from me. Instead, his screen flickered with weird signal delays. Every notification was an automated security alert from his banking apps, but in his excitement, he simply brushed them off as temporary international roaming glitches. He pulled down their carry-on bags, practically strutting down the aisle like he owned the airport. They stepped off the jet bridge into the bright, bustling terminal. Olivia was chattering about dinner reservations and shopping on Via Condotti, while Julian strutted toward passport control, holding their first-class documents with smug satisfaction. He stepped up to the border control booth and tossed his passport to the officer with a casual, dismissive nod. The Italian officer scanned the document. Instantly, the computer screen flashed a bright red alert, accompanied by a quiet, rhythmic chime. The officer's expression hardened. He didn't look back up at Julian. Instead, he made a brief, coded remark into his radio and tapped something on his keyboard. "Is there a problem?" Julian asked, his voice carrying that familiar, patronizing edge he always used when things didn't go his way. "We're first-class passengers. We have a private car waiting outside." Before the officer could even respond, four armed officers from the Polizia di Stato stepped out from behind the partition, surrounding Julian and Olivia. The passengers behind them in line paused, whispering and pulling out their phones. Julian Vance, the lead officer, asked in crisp, accented English. "Yes, that's me," Julian said, his face flushing with anger. "What is the meaning of this? This is ridiculous. You are being detained pursuant to an international red notice issued by Interpol on charges of grand larceny, corporate wire fraud, and illegal asset flight," the officer stated calmly, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Olivia shrieked, backing away instantly.
"What? Wait."
"I don't know anything about this. I'm just his assistant." Julian's heart dropped into his stomach. "Wait, no. This is a mistake. My money is in my account. Let me access my phone. I can pay whatever fine this is." He frantically reached for his phone, pulling up his banking portal to show them his multi-million-dollar balance. But as the page loaded, a single line of bold red text sat across the top of the screen. "Account frozen by federal court order." He tried his secondary card. Declined. His offshore wallet. Access denied. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the breath straight out of his lungs. The money wasn't there. It had never been his to take. The quiet, compliant wife he thought he'd stranded with a mountain of debt had turned his own greed into a net that caught him 10,000 miles away. As the cold steel snapped tightly around his wrists, Julian looked around the terminal in utter horror. Dozens of tourists were recording his humiliating arrest on their phones. He wasn't entering Rome as a wealthy playboy. He was being dragged through the airport in cuffs, broke, exposed, and helpless. The sight of Julian being led away in handcuffs was the last thing Olivia ever saw of him. The moment she realized his millions had vanished and federal charges were looming, her performance as the devoted young girlfriend collapsed. She handed over her phone to authorities, cooperation agreement in hand, disavowing any knowledge of his illegal schemes. Julian was left sitting in an Italian detention cell completely alone, without a dollar to his name, and without a single person willing to post his bail. Within 48 hours, the court orders were finalized back in the States. Every single penny Julian had attempted to steal, along with all our joint liquid assets, was fully restored to my control. Because he had committed willful corporate fraud and attempted to abandon his domestic obligations, the family court moved with remarkable speed. I was awarded sole legal and physical custody of Lily, as well as full ownership of our family home and Julian's remaining personal equity to cover legal damages. Julian's extradition took 3 agonizing weeks, during which he had to sit in holding facilities while his life completely dissolved. When he finally stood before a federal judge back home, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogant posture, he looked broken. He tried to look at me from across the courtroom, his eyes wide with desperate pleading, silently begging for leniency or a shred of forgiveness. But I kept my chin high, my hands folded, and my eyes clear. I offered him no anger, no satisfaction, only the cold, unyielding reality of his own making. He was convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and grand larceny, receiving a 7-year federal prison sentence alongside massive restitution penalties that ensure he will be paying off his debt for the rest of his life. Today, life in our home is peaceful once again. Lily is thriving, surrounded by love and stability, unaware of how close we came to the edge. As for me, I learned that true strength doesn't come from making loud threats or fighting back in anger. It comes from staying quiet, staying focused, and letting a liar walk directly into the trap he set for someone else. Now, I'm curious about all of you who followed my journey to the end. What would you have done if you found yourself in my shoes? Have you ever faced someone who mistook your kindness for weakness? Comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has traveled. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.